So the other piece of courage, and something that can be very disruptive when it comes to performance, are mental blocks. And a mental block is when there's some usually psychologically influenced barrier to you performing in the way that you want to perform. And mental blocks can be very frustrating for people because you feel like physically you know exactly what it is that you want to do. You've done it before. It shouldn't be that difficult. But when it comes to engaging in the performance, you just shut down, become a deer in headlights, and you can't do something that you know you were so capable of doing before. And I see this a lot in my work as a sports psychologist, particularly with gymnasts or divers or other kind of daredevil types of sport that usually have had some type of injury. Maybe they got hurt doing a dive, or they hurt themselves doing a particular gymnastics movement. And even though they train themselves back post-injury to being able to perform that particular technique or that particular event, once they get into the pressure situation or the performance situation, the anxious brain says, whoa, dude, last time you did this, you got hurt. Pretty bad if I remember. So I'm gonna be a very psychologically healthy body and brain and tell you to not do this thing that at one point caused you harm. So it really makes sense. And even though mental blocks can be very frustrating, you could actually spin it in the fact that we're being very psychologically healthy and sound, and our protective internal structures are working really well because they're trying to protect you from harm. Whether that's physical injury, or in other cases, maybe you were performing and it didn't go so well and the coach really laid into you. Or your parents gave you a really hard time on that car ride home. Whatever it was, from an ego perspective, from a psychological perspective, you also might develop a mental block because that was a very difficult, almost trauma-inducing experience that you were witness to, and that you felt that the brain remembers. And the brain is really smart, super smart. So when you find yourself in that situation or a similar situation, whether you got injured or you had some type of psychological damage that occurred in that moment, when we get there, the brain's gonna say, whoa dude, stop, don't do this. You got embarrassed, rejected, or hurt the last time you did. So in order to address the blocks, first off, you have to identify what the block is. When is it occurring? So I've worked with gymnasts that could no longer do a back handspring. So knowing when they can do or when they can't do the back handspring. Can they do the back handspring in practice, or is it only in competitions? So knowing what the mental block is, when it happens to show up, considering when it started, what were some of the triggers that started it, and if you don't know, a really helpful exercise that you can work through in the performance workbook, this companion workbook that we have, is to take inventory, go back through your performance career and in other endeavors that you might also have been involved in, and consider times where you may have had a physical injury, or you may have had some type of psychological or emotional injury. And just take notes of that if you're experiencing a mental block. And then what can often happen is we can match when that emotional or physical trauma occurred and match that back to where the mental block started. And so you may wonder, well, wow, okay, Steve, like, big deal. What does that do? Well, first off, it doesn't make you seem crazy that you're having a mental block. And in fact, it makes you feel psychologically healthy, because who wouldn't establish a bit of fear or hesitancy if you've gone through this thing back here? Of course you would. So it really normalizes and validates your experience of having a mental block because you got hurt or emotionally injured at a particular time. And the brain is always going to remember. And so once we identify that, now we have to work through it in some capacity. So we have to rehabilitate it. And the way we rehabilitate it is in a few different ways. One, if it happens to be a physical skill, which so often it is really taking yourself back to the basics when you learned the skill in the first place. And that may feel like, gosh, what a waste of time. I don't want to take steps back. I want to continue to take steps forward. But the more that we try to press through a mental block, the more pressure we put on the mental block, the worse it actually gets. So we want to be able to take our hands back, take a couple steps back, and progress through that learning sequence that you did even when you were first learning that skill. So we're learning that sequence, and we're supplementing the learning of that sequence and the implementation of that sequence with relaxation training. So now we're teaching the body and the brain, this is an okay thing to do because I'm calm. And so you reassociate the scary behavior with something calming, which then allows the brain to trust, okay, maybe I don't have to freak out the next time that my person goes through this sequence. And that can take a little bit of time to make that connection because some of these emotional or physical injuries can be really intense, really intense. Sometimes they're difficult to get over, so we want to be able to pair that relaxation with the sequencing, using also the power of visualization to picture ourselves doing the performance in a successful type of way. Seeing it over and over and over again, having it become much easier to visualize. And so a combination of those can really help address blocks. Now, I encourage folks, this may not get the job done as far as being able to reduce or resolve a mental block that you have in your life. And a lot of time you may need the help of a sports psychologist, which we have available to you through My Endurance, of course. But to know kind of the basic tenets of how mental blocks happen and how to address them can really empower you to make a decision about how you may want to move forward. However, blocks are very much based in fear, and if we open ourselves up to dealing with them, that demonstrates courage, which is what this section is all about. So, hopefully by now you've got the gears turning on how to become jacked by getting fear fit. And you also have a little bit of a knowledge drop on your lap about how to address mental blocks that can happen in performance. So you may choose courageousness.